Okay, 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 okay. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depende kung nasan kayo. Dapat pala medyo, sorry. Our guest for tonight, depending on wherever you are in the world at the moment, is someone who doesn't speak Tagalog, obviously, because she is, on our perspective, a foreigner. She's from South Africa, and sorry that I forgot that I need to speak in English because normally my guests are Filipinos, obviously, but during special occasions, during special times such as this one, we are lucky enough to have international low carb advocates such as this woman in a bit, and we are going to talk about more about her and her advocacy in relation to low carb, not particularly intermittent fasting, but low carb, and the organizations that she is connected with, particularly Nutrition Network. As you guys know, as most of you know, I'm one of the students of Nutrition Network, of course, as led by Professor Tim Noakes, my idol when it comes to low carb. Um, She's the managing director of Nutrition Network. So we are going to talk more about her and her connection about in relation to these organizations. So basically, Jayne Bullen. So I hope I was able to remember to pronounce it right. Later on, she can correct me anyway. Jayne Bullen is a managing director or the managing director of Nutrition Network. She basically thinks that healthcare research needs more money and smart people, generally speaking. Oh, by the way, this is Chat GPT edited. They gave me her profile, and then I just rephrased it using Chat GPT. So she basically believes, she can correct me anyway afterwards. Basically believes that more money and smart people should basically have a fusion when it comes to wellness. She helped start Eat Better South Africa, which we will later on discuss more about uh, with the Noakes Foundation, which is the foundation of Professor Tim Noakes. And she wants to better teamwork with regards to nutrition and science, if I'm not mistaken. So, of course, once upon a time, we're going to talk about what she did before joining these organizations. Jayne got her MBA or Master's in Business Administration as a Chevening scholar. This is the first time that I actually heard about Chevening. And I was forced to research a bit what Chevening is. And I did not even know how to pronounce it a while ago. I thought it was Chevening. So it turned out it's Chevening Scholar. So which is basically a scholarship, international scholarship granted by the UK government, if I'm not mistaken. So in her case, marketing and international relations was her degree. So I love that her MBA project was focused on, because being a businessman myself, I love that her MBA project, was focused on how food, particularly fast food, are advertised to the kids, because this is a very, 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 very big issue. Because of course, while the parents pay, the children dictates what to pay. So later on, she did media research, strategy, etc. She co-founded Nutrition Network, as I've mentioned, in 2018. I basically became their student, one of the first non-doctor student by 2019, around January, first quarter of 2019. And they're pushing for better health and healthcare system. Without much further ado, let me welcome our special guest for tonight here in the Philippines, today in South Africa, Miss Jayne Bullen. Hello, hello, Jayne.
Hi,
Would you like to greet first?
lovely to meet you all, and thank you for that beautiful introduction.
Thank you, thank you.
Very
Good to have
professionally
you.
summarized.
Yeah. So good to have you here in my special Go Live. Thank you for gracing us with your presence, Jayne.
It's wonderful to be here. I'm
Okay,
really
cool.
excited.
Cool. So first, before we talk about low carb and probably a little bit of intermittent fasting or fasting in general, before we talk about Nutrition Network, Eat Better South Africa, the Noakes Foundation, and Professor Tim Noakes, of course.
Mm.
Before we talk about these organizations and the Prof Noakes, care to share more in depth about you, Jane?
Yeah, sure. I mean, what do you want to know? I've obviously like to talk about my health journey, which has just been one that I think many, many thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions have been on. And I was feeling alone and like there was no hope and there was no solution. And this is
Uh,
why I'm here with you tonight and in this community, is because we were all like feeling like we were fighting a losing battle against everything from weight loss to chronic exhaustion to chronic disease. And there were answers all the time that we didn't see, we weren't told about. So I became, angry as a patient and as a human being. And then as a professional, I became curious. And then eventually it became my life's purpose, to start to uncover and unpack these things in my professional life, but also for myself and for my child. I have a 16-year-old son. He is originated in Southeast Asia. He's half Taiwanese. I had a lot of questions around metabolic health and around the difference between the Western and the Eastern diet. And like the extraordinary differences. I mean, we all know what they are. But I do remember a time living in Taiwan where I felt probably the healthiest I've ever been in my life. So that was
mhm.
something that's been a part of my life, is like travel and understanding different cultural diets and then wanting to unpack these more carefully and look at what's going on, like what the hell is actually going on, literally.
Okay, you mentioned a while ago that you had some health issues that you need to resolve prior to being a part of these organizations, prior to doing this advocacy. Care to share more about what are these conditions that you once had, I assume,
Absolutely.
and
Absolutely. So
how did low carb was able to address or help?
absolutely. So I went through a 20-year journey, like many of us have, where when I was 21, I was told that I had polycystic ovarian syndrome. And I was like always the healthy eater. So I was a super green juicer at university. All my friends were eating chocolates and I was eating like the seed loaf and the green bread, the green juice, and like spending more on food and being really conscious of organic foods. And I still proceeded to get very ill. So it was first like very early on, I was told I had polycystic ovarian syndrome. And then I started to notice central adiposity and started to increasingly suffer from obesity as one of the sort of most obvious symptoms. But of course, what we all know and what I know is that what was going on inside was more significant, is that I was in a state of prediabetes and a lot of other things were going wrong with my body, with my energy. I was told I had chronic fatigue syndrome. Actually, when I was a teenager, I had chronic fatigue that I was then told I had depression. It like went on and on. It was an extraordinary complex thing. And I think what happened was, as it got worse, I became more healthy, like health focused. So I was going on to every imaginable diet. I was doing the green juices. I was doing the detoxes, at times doing things like fasting and very, very extreme diets, doing every medication. I have done every diet probably there is on earth. The full range, like it was really, really extreme. And to be honest, nothing ever really worked. And nothing really seemed to make any difference whatsoever until I found low carb and started to understand what was going on in my body for the first time. And then, as I said before, I got kind of confused, angry, wanted to change things. I became an activist like many of us do. I'm sure you are. That's why you're doing the work that you're doing and why so many of us come to this, is we just go like, how did this happen? And why did no one tell me? And I think back a lot over the many thousands of thousands of rands or dollars that I've spent, tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands, several homes I could have bought in my lifetime, and the money that I've spent on the wrong paths. And going to doctors. I'm not going to say the doctors were wrong, but going to doctors that didn't know actually what was happening and didn't have the right information. And that's where it became really important for me. I lived in the UK, in England. I went there to study. It talks about my Chevening scholarship, and I stayed on there for 7 years. And when I was living there, I realized that the National Health had a different kind, the NHS had a different kind of understanding of metabolism. So South African doctors seemed to have more of an understanding of what was going on metabolically. And I would come back here for holidays and I'd get my metformin script. And then I would go and sit and try and explain to a doctor in the UK, and they would not agree with me. And they would not give me a script for things like metformin. They wouldn't send me for routine tests that I knew I needed. So it felt like things, even though we're kind of down here south, quite backward in many ways in that Southern Africa, it felt like there was an understanding of metabolism and what was going on with the human, with the problems that we're facing with chronic disease, that was a little bit more exploratory, creative, less regulated, perhaps, was one of the reasons. There were a lot of reasons why this felt like the place to land. And at the point where I met Prof. Noakes, who was going through his own dietary transformation and life and kind of ideological transformation, it was a little bit like a match made in heaven, because we'd both been on long journeys with our health and we were looking for answers. And then we were both quite angry and we were both activists, and we wanted to change the way things were done. And we really wanted to bring awareness and money towards research and get things changed, shift things dramatically in the way that, things were working. And that goes through to everything. The more we unpack this, the more we start to understand how food marketing shapes and has controlled and regulated humanity and our health for so long. So it became very important to start to touch all areas of the way that we eat. And that means a big system change that we're all involved in now. It's been 10 years. So this year we're celebrating the 10th year of the Noakes Foundation. So we've been doing this work, chipping, chiseling, fighting at the forefront of the revolution away from chronic disease for 10 years. And we've got it. We know we've got about another 10 years to go, because anything that's big takes between 20 and 30 years to start to see change. So it's almost like, as a revolutionary army, we are collectively about halfway through we've built the foundations, and now we're starting to build the implementational side of the change that we understand has to happen. And we're all part of that. Like everyone that's joined the low carb movement, everyone that's been brave and has gone against medical advice. So, I mean, the first thing I did, and I'm sure many of you that are listening and probably yourself did, was when I was told, and when I found out that I had insulin resistance, I went onto this low GI story. So I was putting like 4 teaspoons of fructose into my tea, and I thought I was being super healthy, and of course what happened? It led to non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. And then the next thing, and then the next thing, and all these things were piling on top of each other to the point where I became incredibly unhealthy, 10, 15 years down the line, doing so much for my health. Like I was always on the healthiest possible approach that was just making me sicker. I mean, to the point that at one point I actually resigned from my job and danced full time to try and improve my metabolic health. So I was dancing up to 12 hours a day, and I would say that's the worst health I've ever been in, the worst shape. I was very, very ill and obese at that point, dancing 12 hours a day and eating very healthily.
And still obese.
Terribly obese and very, very unwell, like really heading towards a path of chronic disease at that point.
Okay, so you mentioned you met Professor Noakes and the jive, and you were just simply synchronized with each other. But prior to meeting Professor Tim Noakes, where did you learn about low carb?
Goodness, I did the Atkins. Didn't we all?
I
bought the Atkins book.
The rebranded version of
the first version. So I did the very first version of Atkins before it was the new Atkins revolution, and that was the first time I ever saw results. But at the same time that I was doing that, one of my half sister, who's quite a bit older than me, passed away from cancer, and at the minute that happened, I got such a fright, and I said, that's it. I'm done. I'm going back to vegetarian. Like I was on a very strict vegetarian diet because I didn't want to have cancer. And I believed that could cause cancer. So that was before the research that we now have today and before the work that we've done. 15, 20 years ago, it was very scary to follow a low carb diet. Everyone told you were going to die. We all know it. It's still scary. It's still difficult. People still tell you're doing the wrong things. But back then it was terrifying. Even if the symptoms were improving, It was like, I'm getting so much better, but everyone's telling me that this is going to kill me, so I better not do it. You know,
Yeah.
ridiculous.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when you met, of course, let's go to Professor Noakes, because your official low carb journey started when you collaborated basically with Professor Tim Noakes. So and as you've mentioned, it's already 10 years since
Yes.
you guys started or founded the Noakes Foundation. So for the benefit of the viewers at the moment and the viewers during the replay, can you tell us more about the Noakes Foundation in particular? What do the Noakes Foundation basically or primarily do?
Absolutely. So it was started by the Noakes family. And those of you that know Prof. Noakes' story know that he published this red book, The Real Meal Revolution. And that book made more money than he had imagined. And he was at the time starting to retire from his decades of academic excellence. You know, he had been a known academic superhero and sports scientist in our country for so many decades. So he wasn't really doing this to make money or to grow his reputation. He was really doing it for himself because he felt like he had to tell everyone that he had reversed his diabetes. His father had died terribly from diabetes. It was a calling for him. So the foundation was founded by his family. And I was the first employee at the foundation. And what we did very quickly, I came from a media and research background. And I'd been working on a beer brand, a world famous beer brand. And we'd had this massive 6-figure budget for our Christmas research campaign. And I got there and I started to look through the research budgets and then also the segmentation that was used in the research. And I nearly fell off my chair. I thought, like, are there zeros missing from the end of these figures? Like, what is going on here? And of course, what that unpacked for me personally, and I think for all of us, was the shock that marketing and brand spend so much money understanding their customer and researching just how to improve their Christmas campaign for a beer product. And we spend a microscopic percentage of that understanding human health and understanding like diet and what we should be eating. So, you know, these studies that were done, particularly in the last 50, 60 years, that were done on diet and on the nutritional guidelines often had very small or inadequate sample groups. So, for example, we know now that the GI diet was only done on a group of male athletes, and that doesn't really apply metabolically to women for various reasons. So I started to ask the questions as to why, where was the diversity in research? Like, where were, in South Africa, it felt like the research was being done on like a very small segment that is a tiny percentage of our actual national demographic. And we weren't seeing that women were included in research, that a diversity of ethnic origins were being included in research. It felt like things were wrong. And so we set out with a common mission to really look at how we could fix the future of human health by changing and supporting the research and the policies that were needed to actually improve diets in this country. And what happened very quickly from there was that we funded a very nice big piece of research on metabolic health. And then secondly, we founded something that's now called Eat Better South Africa. And that was very
Which is what exactly?
So what that was at the time was we said, okay, well, this diet's working so well for, you know, Prof. Noakes and his peers. Will it work for the average South African, which is somebody with significantly less access to resources, somebody with very significantly less income? So they're not going to be able to eat, you know, necessarily even steak. That's like a very, very luxurious food for many South Africans. And how are we going to take this to the people that need it the most? And that in our country is about 86% of South Africa has public health care or state health care. And state health care in our country, we have the highest Gini coefficient in the world. So what we have in South Africa is the most extremes in terms of polarity. We have extreme wealth, and the wealthy segments in our country have very, very world-class private health care. And then we have the rest of the country that has very, very limited access to primary care, you know, even basic primary care and diabetes care, for example. So a typical diabetic in South Africa goes about every 3 months and has their blood pressure checked by a nurse, and they have their glucose tested. And then the nurse says, like, oh, your sugars are so much higher, your blood pressure's gone up, like, stop eating whatever it is, usually meat. And they give them the diet that says, like, eat margarine, eat whole wheat bread, eat brown sugar. And then they come back 3 months later and they're worse, or hopefully
They're
alive
worse.
still. I mean, sometimes not even living. Or can't even necessarily get to the clinic because it's very far away, and they're so ill that they're struggling to even travel. So the outlook for a poorer person in our country, or a person that lives in a local community, compared to the outlook of somebody with excellent healthcare, is not equal. And what we discovered with Eat Better South Africa through the pilots that we ran is that this gave people a level playing field. So we know that diabetes doesn't discriminate, like it's a disease of the poor and the wealthy. And by giving people the access to just this basic information, we've created a model of empowerment that can ultimately change their lives. And that is
Jayne,
changing
so
their diets.
sorry to butt in, but
No,
I'm
no,
kind of curious
please
because
do.
here in the Philippines, our staple here is rice. So
Yes.
as you've mentioned, it's kind of different here in South East Asia, or basically in
Mhm.
Asian countries. But
Mhm.
as with regard to the typical meal of the public masses there in South Africa, you've mentioned, because even here in the Philippines, steaks are kind of a luxury as well. So
Absolutely.
how were you able to, under the Noakes Foundation and Eat Better South Africa, what were the food that you taught South Africans to basically consume? I'm kind of curious about their
Mhm.
what they ate, if not
So,
steak.
our South Africa, not steak, definitely not
Yeah.
steak. Our typical South African community person eats a massive percentage of unrefined carbohydrates and sugars. So the diet is not dissimilar to what we're seeing in Southeast Asia, and in many places in the world, like in South America. The actual plate macros are very similar. Our staple foods are maize-based, and they are also bread and rice. So we
Hmm.
see something called millipap, which is a very, very highly refined maize meal. And then white bread, very, very cheap, mass-produced white bread, and white rice. Those tend to be the bases of most plates. And then there's something small with it. And less of the thing that's with it, depending on the income that the person has at the time of month and the access that they have to food. So what we did was we looked at exactly what community we were in. And our diets are quite diverse in South Africa. So you can travel like 100 kilometers and the diet will be quite different depending on the community that you're in. So we would take a food plan of everything that people were eating for a week, and then we would work with a dietitian to replace those or substitute those very highly refined aspects. So we focus very much on, we don't try to get people to eat perfectly. We work with what's on your plate and how we're going to get it better. So that
Hmm.
may mean, like, you can still have, if rice is a non-negotiable for you, how do we make sure that you can have a little bit of rice, but keep it healthy? Like, balance it better, mix it with different foods. And then perhaps at some point, yes, in a chronic disease situation, we might want to work with you to go on to collie rice for forever or for a short period of time. So it's very much about who you're working with and how you're going to make things better for them. Not going into a community and saying, give up everything and just eat this list, because that
So
doesn't work.
basically, more on progression than perfection, right?
Yes, and there are different people within communities. So we are local community people, and the average South African has suffered from a lot of trauma, and they have a lot of difficulties in accessing healthy food. So we cannot tell somebody, we don't go and say to a lady that's living in a township that's feeding a family of 11 to now go an intermittent fast for 72 hours and to only eat meat. Like, it's never going to work. It's like, it's not a solution for that person or that community. So it's about very much finding ways for people to eat better. So Eat Better Philippines. How do we find
Mhm.
that? We find ways to get that rice much less on the plate, or much less frequently. And then we start to go, okay, well, what was the indigenous diet in your country? And what we know in South Africa is that these grains and maize-based products, people believe to be indigenous, but actually they came here with the Portuguese colonists.
Yeah.
And it's not an indigenous diet. It's a diet that was brought here to feed animals and to feed slaves. It's
Yep.
not what was here on the land that their ancestors were eating. So it's
Yeah.
very much about going back to what our ancestors ate and, the real diets that people were eating.
It's
And
ba-
I was doing some
it's
research.
basically the food of the conquerees, not the
Yes,
conquerors.
yes, yes, absolutely. And it's
Yeah.
very much around like what's cheap, what's easy to grow. Like how do we mass produce food in a way that's just going to feed millions? And I was doing some research around fasting, obviously, because I know your community is very into fasting, and it's the same story. It's like when we really look back, our ancestors weren't eating 6 meals a day. I mean, it's just an unrealistic expectation that we place on ourselves as a
Yep.
symptom of kind of modern convenience that we now have to have 6 meals a day. It just
Yep.
seems crazy. Yeah. So very
Actually,
much about going back to basics.
actually, fasting. Once upon a time, when I started LCIF Philippines, my group, my community, uh, the I believe you're a branding expert as well, such as myself, because you're a
Mm,
marketing lady,
mm,
as
mm.
I reckon. But it used to be not LCIF per se, but I, I incorporated IF because, like it or not, we are doing IF. When we are sleeping,
Yes.
we are doing IF, basically.
Yes.
So
Mm,
I tried to make people understand that whether you like it or not, you are fasting every single day. Because
mm.
before you sleep, the time you sleep, and then after waking up, that's basically fasting. So if
Yeah.
you sleep, if you before you sleep, it takes you 4 hours, and then 8 hours of sleep, and then 4 hours after waking up. That's basically 16 hours of fasting. That's 16/8, basically.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
yeah, I just incorporated it, and thanks to Dr.
Mm,
Jason Fung.
mm.
But anyway,
Absolutely.
going back. So what happened to Eat Better South Africa? What were the results, so to speak, when you tried customizing as well the diets or the way of eating of South Africans as compared to Professor Tim Noakes' personal diet? What happened?
Well, so it was better than we could ever have imagined. And that was why this organization still exists, is because we see on our studies, which are very minimally interventionalist. The group meets for 6 weeks once a week, between 6 and 12 weeks, once a week. It's coaching based. We take waist measurements, we take weight. Sometimes we take bloods if there's a budget. And we see results similar to the studies that we see with Virta Health. So tracking,
Hmm.
not as successful, it's not as intense, it's not as resource, but close. And of course, that showed us that this can be done. This diet can work for all communities, and that people can be offered and presented an alternative to like the very, very medicalized approach to particular diabetes and hypertension and obesity. So some of our state clinics that are, thank you to those of you that have done it, like Dunoon Clinic, some of the clinics in our local communities have started bringing this into their diabetes clinics because their results are unsuccessful, their treatments aren't successful. There's a lot of reasons why it's very, very difficult for a community-based South African person to, for example, even just use insulin and have cold storage management and all of those things successfully administered. So this is a solution that works and that we believe could really actually ultimately save the outlook of a country and potentially the world's health. By just making some very, very simple transformations and changes in the way that we approach diet and approach healthcare. I think that's the big thing, is like we know that the cost of changing your lifestyle is so much tinier than the cost of the burden of state healthcare. But it
Yeah,
takes time. We're working with a big system that has big decision-making powers and, many, many players involved. And
and
that's a long journey. Mm.
speaking of which, it's up to you if you want to share, but it's basically public information. So, with the quote unquote good results of Eat Better South Africa, were you guys able to, were you faced with a lot of challenges, not just personal challenges, which is very minute with in comparison with political challenges, uh, challenges from the authorities and the other so-called experts out there. so that the people watching right now and the people watching in the Go Live in the replay of the Go Live probably would be able to understand personally from you. Were you faced with these challenges, particularly political challenges? Because here in the Philippines, just to share briefly, with my movement, and I'm not even a doctor, I'm not even a nutritionist. I received dozens to countless death and legal threats already from various sectors of the community, which I don't know if they're doctors, nutritionists, etc. But were you guys faced with political challenges, probably, Jane?
So yes and no. Like obviously, the very very famous trial that Prof. Noakes went through with our Health Professions Council was an example of a kind of a political backlash that he faced. And that took many years. He had to fight for many years against, I'm going to call it the institution, to accept, what he had done and to accept the lifestyle that he'd chosen and his voice that he had to use. He felt absolutely obligated to use. But that was, what we've always done is we've just focused on the science. So we have gone and said, this is the science, this is the evidence. And there is more evidence, we now know, than there is for the kind of mainstream diet. And I think in South Africa, there's an understanding of that because the low carb movement had such an impact. So many millions of people in South Africa took what's called a Banting diet and adopted it. So typically in a South African restaurant, there's a little low carb section on the menu. We've got low carb sections in our supermarkets. And we were like early adopters of the low carb movement.
Really?
From like
you have those in your supermarkets?
Yes, absolutely. Yes. I mean, you can
Wow.
very, very comfortably find low carb products in most places that you go. So
and it's branded
yes,
with
yes,
low carb,
absolutely.
the words low carb.
Yeah, so
Wow.
we've got a lot of very, very good brands that are national. All of our big retailers have their own low carb or carb-free brands that they've taken onto the market. Most restaurants and the bigger chains offer options, so you can always have like bunless burgers. It's very easy here to eat a Banting diet, and that made it easier for us because, as we know, like branding, you're a branding person, so you understand this. Marketeers follow demand. And the demand was heading in that direction. So we were quite lucky. It's quite easy to eat low carb in South Africa because of that. It's a more comfortable debate to have. And then when Prof. Noakes' trial, when he was kind of vindicated of all of the charges against him, at the same time as that, the Nutrition Network was being born. And that was very much training medical professionals. And it was, again, just purely science-based. So we have global CPDs, continued professional developments, for all of our training, CMEs in America. And it's based on pure science. And it's never really been contested. I think it's understood now that this is a missing part of medicine. So it's like everyone accepts that nutrition is underrepresented in medical training. And that, this has to change. So, this textbook, which is now the second highest grossing science textbook in the world within the Elsevier group, is an example of how there's a demand. Doctors have been struggling for so long with chronic disease and not having results that they were changing for themselves, particularly in South Africa. A lot of doctors were changed by their patients, and a lot of people that come to the Nutrition Network
it's the other way around, huh?
Yeah, like they started to feel embarrassed, like they were giving their patients traditional medical advice, and then the patients were coming back 40 kilograms lighter and saying, "Oh, well, I ignored your advice," and it started to embarrass them. So the movement was it was a grassroots-driven movement. And no, we haven't had terrible experiences, terrible threats. There is political backlash, but from a very reasonable perspective. So for years, we've been going to like our Department of Health and trying to get them to implement Eat Better South Africa. And they're very, very approachable, but they do say to us, we're struggling with such basic needs in this country. Like we're trying to get clean water and street lights and sanitation for many of the people. And this is like a high level thing. And of course, we argue it's not when we look at the cost of diabetes to state care. But it's a long-term process. So but it has been hard. It's not part of the mainstream systems and decision making. So of course, our guidelines haven't changed here. And we are still seen as rebellious. But here we go. There you've got it on your screen. We believe that we're changing healthcare one practitioner at a time. And our latest data shows that we've influenced and impacted over 78 million patients globally through this work. So
Wow.
that we're reaching that mass tipping point now over time where things have changed and systems are catching up with the change.
Hmm. So
Mm,
basically, you created Nutrition Network to educate, primarily educate healthcare professionals because I
yes.
remember when I first applied in 2018, I was rejected because because I was not a doctor. I was not accepted because I was not, as I've mentioned. I think I was one of the first non-doctor non-doctor student back
Mm,
in first quarter of 2019. So
mm,
basically, you created the Nutrition Network to somehow educate healthcare professionals. So if here in the Philippines, there are a lot of doctors, dietitians, and other healthcare professionals who are not yet informed, for the lack of better word, because I'm trying to be civil and professional at this go live, but normally I don't do that. But yeah, they're not yet that informed. So, what are the ways that the Nutrition Network, the Noakes Foundation, Eat Better, South Africa, and you, Jane, what are the things
mm.
that you guys do in order to somehow convince private healthcare professionals to at least start learning about LCIF, or you guys call it therapeutic carbohydrate restriction, right? So, what are the ways that you guys do to convince them or inspire them?
So I think we've got to thank you and the hundreds of other people that when we launched this wrote to us and said, like, why can't we do this? Because we were absolutely sure that this was only for medical doctors and specialists and then nurses and dietitians. So anyone with a practice number and that's registered through a health professions council in their country, that was who it was for. And we were adamant. And then we got amazing people like you who are doing this amazing work and who have a huge impact and influence. And we know, of course, that the results maybe and certainly back then were better than what doctors were seeing. So we started to go, okay, hold on, like this, we've got to change this in some way, but we have to do it very carefully because we really, really don't want healthcare to say, oh, this is just a coaching thing. What's now happening, of course, and how we've changed in the way that we operate as a community is that doctors are coming to coaches for help and for support. And I think you might be seeing that in your local communities. So it's not the other way around anymore. And that's how we're doing it, is we're not having to do as much as we thought we would have to. It's really people are coming to us and saying, like, I need this as part of my toolkit, and how am I going to upskill in this area? So our content is very driven by what people need. It's like people are coming to us and saying, now we are seeing too many patients with cancer. So like too many doctors, too many specialists, too many primary care workers, and then too many coaches like yourself are coming to us and saying, where's the science for cancer? Like, how does this apply? It's cutting edge. It's a little bit edgy. So we're going, okay, well, we're going to find a way when we're ready, when there's enough science behind it, to build content that brings this in and that helps guide people to be more informed. So it's like, we don't want you to, say, for example, as a physician or a general practitioner or as a coach, to like take on a newly diagnosed cancer patient solo and then like put them onto an intermittent fasting and a ketogenic diet. Absolutely not. What we're saying is there should be options presented to patients in community of practice with their healthcare team. So what we at the moment seeing is that a cancer patient is just going sent to oncology, and oncologists are very medication focused and they're very focused on like the disease and how to treat its symptoms. Rightly so. They're very, very caring, compassionate, kind, amazing doctors. But at the same time, where's the team that's going to take that person on the journey that led them to get cancer or led them to get diabetes? We know that it takes 20 years for the average chronic disease to manifest, maybe longer if you're trying, like me, I was trying to be so healthy that like the diabetes is still at bay, but it's still there. Like, even though it's been more than 20 years, it's like knocking, or if I have a few bad weeks of diets, it's like pops up over that threshold sometimes. That's a 20-year journey, and there has to be a team. The patient has to understand they need like the coach, the doctor, the specialist, and everything else that they can get that's going to walk them through this journey to empowering themselves to the point that they don't need anyone, hopefully, into the future. And that's where we're heading, as we're saying, okay, well, how are we going to get patients empowered? And so they don't need this. I don't want my son, who's now 16, to need to go to a doctor to tell him what to eat. I mean, it's farcical. It's ridiculous. Like, he needs the right guidelines in place so that he just lives a healthy life. And the diet that we're eating at the moment is kind of almost like stopping us from being able to live a healthy life. So what we're doing is the work is trying to take away those barriers, just to allow people the freedom to live a healthier lifestyle that's not so hampered by medication and healthcare. But we have to do it one step at a time, one practitioner at a time, one coach at a time, one patient, and then, of course, one meal at a time. One plate at a time. It's like, is this plate better than yesterday?
Okay. So I'd just like to mention a friend, a doctor friend, a Filipino doctor friend who is a schoolmate of mine here in Nutrition Network. But of course, she is a doctor, and she just I think she just graduated from batch 2
Wonderful.
of the doctors, something batch for doctors. She is like to mention her. She is Dr. Suzette Encarnado. She's a diabetologist from Oman, somewhere in UAE, I think. But she's a Filipino doctor. So she just graduated the most comprehensive online course, I think, of Nutrition Network to date. So hello to Dr.
Amazing.
Suzette out there. And if ever, for example, you want to, if people, oh, so I think, let me just share this. I think you shared this. There you go. So, for example, a lot of Filipinos, grassroots Filipinos, are kind of appalled, uh, confused on where to look for a low carb doctor. Because here in the Philippines, aside from the in-house showbiz drama of the low carb community, in every industry, I think there's a there's a an envious play everywhere. So if someone is looking for a practitioner, uh, how many do you have an idea if how many doctors we have here in the Philippines that is actually a graduate of Nutrition Network? Let me just
That
click
is
this.
That is a very good question, and I don't know the answer for that. So I would have to look that up. But we have a very small percentage of our actual graduates unfortunately, list on these listings pages, which is a disappointment for me, because I would love it if everyone was there loud and proud. So it's not a representation. And what we can maybe do is pull a list of names and share them with you, because it's kind of important that there is a little bit more data out there of how you find somebody. And that being said, what I also recommend is that you start with a coach. Our coaches don't have the limitations that doctors have to work with you from wherever you are in the world. So if there's a coach in Australia or South Africa or anywhere that really you feel a connection to, start with them and start working with them. And coaches are the first place to start. Sorry to all of our docs that are listening, but when it comes to weight loss, people go to, this is why it's an Oprah Winfrey bought into Weight Watchers. I mean, why? Because it's one of the brilliant solutions are that the way we have to tackle obesity is through lifestyle. And most people need coaches and support walking this journey. That means, of course, obviously, if I'm not telling you if you have a chronic disease and you need medical supervision to ignore that, but find a coach and find a doctor that is going to understand what's going on for you. And you may have to shop abroad. Unfortunately, I was living in England and I used to come back here because there wasn't what was available. Of course, now we've got many amazing colleagues through the NHS that do understand low carb. But if you're in a country with a small community, find someone somewhere that can give you good advice that understands. So there we go. We've got Dr. Alexander Soroka. We've got you and Gail. And there's many more.
Basically, I think we're almost the same batch, Dr. Alex Soroka. But of course, he's in the batch with the doctors, of course.
Yes.
But
So there's
yeah,
already a team. There you've got two doctors and a coach that are like listed, and there's many more. As I said, like it's probably 1/10 of our subscribers actually list. So there's a lot
yeah,
more there behind that. But it's also as a patient, Dr. Andrew Aswari, he won't mind me talking about him. He is he's a Southeast Asian originated medical doctor that lives in New Jersey who did our certification because one of his patients lost, I think, 40 kilograms. And then he tried it, copied the patient, lost so much weight, reversed his prediabetes, and then did the certification. So there are people that have really done incredible transformations in their own lives and families' lives behind under the radar in this community. And you've got such an incredible fasting community. So we've got to find some advocates in your community, Dave, that are trained, and we'd love to support you with that in terms of actually getting some of your guys trained as proper advocates that
yeah.
really know the science.
As I've mentioned during at the backstage a while ago, back in 2018, before I joined the school nutrition network, I was already trying to figure out how to give certified coaching certifications for my own association, because there are a lot of coaches here in the Philippines, fitness trainers,
Amazing.
for example, life coaches, for example, that could teach LCIF or that could teach LCHF, for that matter. But of course, doesn't really have the necessary certification, although it's not really government sanctioned certification, but nevertheless, the trainings and the information involved are basically scientific. So, as I've mentioned a while ago, when we first, with Candice, when I first talked to Candice, I think the timing wasn't that perfect. That was a pre COVID-19 era, and the timing wasn't just perfect. So we were unable to create a collaboration between the two. But now I think we can, probably
Mm.
off air one of these days. We can talk more about it. And I have some more local doctors who are somehow committed to the cause as compared before, because before, most doctors here just want to eradicate me from the face of the earth. But now some are actually becoming more accepted. It has become more accepted, although some are kind of envious of what happened because I'm not a doctor, so to speak. Anyway, but yeah. So
Mm.
let's go to for the viewers out there, the non-doctors particularly, because my market is not really doctors because I'm not a doctor. But for the viewers out there who are interested, probably to not yet now because the collaboration is not yet set. But if they
Mm.
want to learn more about therapeutic carbohydrate restriction, as we now call it, during my time, it's not yet called that way. But yeah, so if they're interested to learn more and hopefully become certified under Nutrition Network, how do they go about it, Jane?
So they can find us through, I'm sure, through your page. There's a link. They can find us on the nutritionnetwork.org. There you go. You've got the website URL up there. Thank you for sharing it. And yeah, I mean, we would love to work with you and to collaborate with your community. It's yeah, very much about finding localized solutions and learning from each other as we go. I think that's really, really important. So we've got about 32 trainings that are online, so you can do them from anywhere in the world, and they almost all of them have continued professional development with them. There's our ethics training. You can also do a pathway if you're interested in becoming a Society for Metabolic Healthcare practitioners, the SMHP pathway, which is a specifically predetermined route to become a metabolic health practitioner through them. We're their training partner in that. And there's just so many ways to do it. And of course, the other way is to just actually learn yourself through the group, through your group, and to find your own path with that. And I think that's really important, is as a patient, I'm a coach and I'm a patient as well as working in this field. And I've learned, I had a glucometer recently that surprised me. Sorry, not a glucometer, a CGM, a continuous glucose monitor, that really, really surprised me after all these years. And I keep learning new things about what my body needs. And that's really important. This is it's self-empowerment ultimately that we're teaching. So for the professional community and coaches, which is who we train, there's pathways and there's certifications that you can do. For patients, there's ways to find practitioners and to meet in your community and to keep learning. And that's what we're all doing together. Fasting is the same story. I mean, I've if there's time, I'd love to talk a little bit about fasting. I don't know if we have time, but there's so much.
We have all the time in the world for as long as you have time.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, I think something to, I read a lot. I read up again through our textbook of all of the actual official science around fasting, which is so immense. But ultimately, for those of you that struggle with fasting, like I have in the past, I don't call it fasting, because the word makes me feel like I'm giving up things. So I call it resting and digesting instead. And that makes me feel like safer. Like fasting feels like a very religious, sacrificial experience. Whereas actually, if I say to myself, like, I'm going to let my digestion rest and digest, which is kind of like giving it a break. It works so hard all the time, and now I'm going to just let it heal.
We call it mental hacks.
Yes, it's like digestive mental health. Like, when does it get the chance to recuperate? Of course, overnight, but I mean, sometimes it needs a little bit more of a rest, and sometimes it doesn't want to rest. And it's like a constant conversation that we have with our digestive system, or our microbiome, which is our intelligence. It's our primal intelligence. So there's so much to be said. There's so much knowledge, so much wisdom in this kind of cleansing journey that fasting offers us, and this journey of resting. And it's beautiful that you really focus on that in your community. And I'm sure there's so much incredible knowledge, especially within Eastern medicine, around fasting and kind of the therapeutic properties thereof. So much to learn from all of you, actually.
Yeah. Actually, fasting, because there was a group here in the Philippines, it used to be separate groups, low carb and intermittent fasting. So I basically took the best of both worlds and branded it under one brand. As a matter of fact, low carb and intermittent fasting is a registered trademark. It's actually a registered trademark. So I own the brand here in the Philippines, being an entrepreneur. Yeah. So I just combined it, and a lot of fasters here in the Philippines are kind of having a hard time doing fasting because, of course, they were eating carbs, high carb food. And they were kind of confused why they cannot comfortably do fasting. And I told them it's because, which is something I learned, of course, in Nutrition Network, because your hunger hormone and your satiety hormones are not in its proper place. For example, so your ghrelin, which is your hunger hormone, is always there, so forcing you to eat more. So fasting is kind of harder. So unlike if you trigger your leptin or your satiety hormone, for example, you will eat less frequently, therefore longer fasting, for example. So I just basically connected the two. So anyway, we can have more discussions, or probably more live. I see you guys are becoming more and more active now in GoLive. I see you and Tamzin as well. I see you guys are doing more GoLives than before as compared to the previous years. So maybe one of the things that we can collaborate on, if we happen to discuss things afterwards, is the GoLive. And you guys, oh, by the way, anyone who manages your social media accounts, I can give pre-approval benefit in LCIF Philippines Facebook group, so that any posts related to Nutrition Network and the likes will be automatically approved. So, but of course, you just have to understand that it's a local community, so don't expect much engagement
English.
because it's not our mother tongue.
You
So
know, Dave,
anyway,
I just want to congratulate you on this incredible community that you've built and that exists in the Philippines and in Southeast Asia. It surprised me. Like, and how amazing that there are so many of you that have jumped onto this low carb story and that are so engaged in it. I didn't know. And I think it's kind of happened silently over the last few years during COVID and testament to all the work and passion that you have
it's
and that your
actually
business has.
actually it's prior to COVID, prior to
Mm.
COVID-19. It's 2018. Should you guys need stories, anecdotal evidences, testimonies from the Philippines, you guys feel free to post and ask for testimonies there, or probably we can collaborate so that we can officially
Mm.
ask for. Probably
Mm.
I can give them incentives to share their stories
Mm.
because of course it's their story.
Yeah, I mean, it
So
would be really,
yeah,
really interesting to hear of just different, different diets that are coming through and how the application of them is evolving in the East compared to the West. Because I think we have
yeah,
so many different interpretations of what a ketogenic and TCR diet is. And I remember back to when I was a vegan and I was living in Taiwan, I went to a TCM specialist and he gave me this diet, which I burnt because it was like, actually what I now know is it was a ketogenic diet, but it was like pork fat. And I was
hmm
vegan. So I just thought I'd gone to it was the worst thing that had ever happened to me in my life. I wish I'd listened to him. Back then, this was in like 2008. If I'd listened to him then, it would have helped me a long way faster into metabolic health, than some of the things I still struggle with today. So there's a lot of wisdom that's been left behind and that we need to share and understand better.
yeah,
Mm.
yeah, yeah. But I think the timing couldn't be more perfect because of course you met with someone who I would love to meet. Hopefully, if my wife and I can drop by South Africa this year, because we love to travel. If there
Awesome.
is one country that I last year we traveled 8 countries. So
Amazing.
we are taking a hiatus to traveling because
Travel
it's
break.
kind of, yeah, we need a vacation
Awesome.
from these I always say we need a
Travel
vacation from these
vacation.
vacations. Yeah, we need a vacation from these
I love
vacations
that.
because it's
Oh,
it's
how
too much.
divine.
Yeah, but this year, if there is a country that I would want to visit officially, would be South Africa, so that I could personally meet Professor Tim Noakes
Hmm.
in the
Amazing.
flesh, of course. And
Amazing.
yeah. Anyway,
You'd love to.
would you like to promote your the easiest way for people to learn about TCR is the book. Would you like to promote
Um,
the
yeah,
keto
so
book?
we've got our book Ketogenic that came out last year through LCIF International, and you can order that online through Amazon, or you can also do any of our trainings through our Nutrition Network platform. And there's a patient training which I really recommend. I think it's like $99, and we're happy to give it away at a very reduced rate as well for kind of countries that aren't on the dollar. And that's just really like how to start the keto lifestyle. And what that is really for any patient to actually reverse their diabetes. It was developed by Dr. Neville Wellington, and it's what he does with his patients. Like, he walks them through it, but it's just a simple training that you can do that can actually take you through diabetes reversal. So there's many tools. And another one, of course, is addictive eating. You talked about intermittent fasting and ghrelin and all of those things, but before that is the emotional satiety that food represents. And if you're not working on that and on what food means for you from an emotional perspective, or from a kind of emotional addictive perspective, then you're probably going to struggle with fasting. So that's something I really recommend, is to start to look at like addictive eating and how you changing that, which is also, of course, got to do with changing your stress, changing your trauma levels, addressing other mental health strategies. So there's so many resources available, and there's just so much wisdom in our global communities collectively that we have to share with each other. So many places to get access to information. This book, I'm going to say, is mainly for doctors. So if you're like a coach or like a lay person, I don't recommend it for you, but unless you really, really know the science, because it's quite high level. It's for a medical doctor to kind of have on their desk in terms of treating patients. So rather go for a training, or for your group, for example, where there's like more community-based knowledge.
I'm
And yeah,
actually going to buy more of these books and send it to a lot of medical associations here for free. I'm going to
wow,
donate the book for free to
that's amazing.
them.
Well, you must talk to us about getting it at our discount because it's also quite an expensive. Medical textbooks are expensive, unfortunately.
Yeah,
We are
yeah.
working on a more
If
simplified, like layperson version of
I
this.
I always say, because one of the things that my bashers always tell me, and of course the other people, so that they could destroy my reputation, is that low carb or LCIF here in the Philippines has no basis. So that's one of the things that they use to discredit LCIF and to discredit me. Aside from the fact that I'm not a doctor, which I often say, but I learned from doctors. So basically, what they said, I say. So I'm just an extension of what they said. Now they're going to say, now there's no basis for LCIF, and I often tell people as a rebuttal for this is that no, there is no lack of low carb information in this world. Actually, there is only a lack of interest in learning the low carb information because there are
Mhm.
basis at the moment, and you've already compiled it. Back in my day, there's no compilation. There's
Yeah.
no compilation back in
Well,
my day
that
in
was why we did
2019.
it. To be
Yeah.
honest, that's why we did this book is because we wanted something that was actually, unfortunately, I don't like burning down, cutting trees down, but something that's centralized where it has, there are over 4,000 references and there's no dispute around the science anymore. I think the science is settled. It's agreed, it's accepted. So it's like, now how are we going to action that? How are we going to implement what needs to be implemented to change things on a practical level? And
Yeah.
that's the work
So
you're doing. Yeah.
basically, we will be discussing this off air soon, how we can collaborate with Nutrition Network and, of course, my organization. But for now, do you have final words or message for basically three sectors that I want you to say something about? The authorities, the experts, and the media reporters, basically. So, any inspiring messages for them
Change your
in line with
lifestyle,
low carb? Yeah.
change your lifestyle, change your diet, change the world.
Okay. Pretty much like a beauty queen response. Thank you, Jane.
Thank you
Unless you
so
have any
much.
other question for me,
Thank you so much for your bravery and your courage. Mm,
you're welcome. And thank you for gracing us with your presence again. And I'm looking forward to having an off air chat soon with you and
mm.
Candice, probably. And was this Sabrina, probably?
Yes,
So
yes. Will
whoever are the leaders
do.
now, we can discuss more about Nutrition Network, the courses, the book, the foundation, because I'm also going to have my own foundation this year, the Coach Dave Aguila Foundation. So there are a lot of things that we can collaborate about.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Okay, for now, thank you,
Bye
Jane, and
bye.
see you in the future soon, very soon. Bye bye for now.
Bye.
Okay, so there you have it. Ay, hindi na pala ako kailangan mag-English. Medyo tumugo ilong ni Coach Dave. So yun, so I hope meron kayong yung mangilan-ngilan. Alam ko naman na hindi ganoon ka exciting at hindi ganoon ka interesante, no, ang topic ng wait lang bro. Ang topic ng low carb, lalo pat hindi ito yung mga mema-mema. Hello ka bro. Hindi ito yung mga mema-mema lang, no, na subject, no. But in our own little ways, no, as I've mentioned sa inyo, ang LCIF is hindi ko siya hindi ko siya inimbento. So it's really something that I did not invent. It's something global. A lot of doctors, dietitians, scientists, etc. in the world are already teaching it since even before I founded LCIF, no. So sabi ko nga, walang hindi there is no such thing as lack of information sa low carb. You just have lack of interest. They just have lack of interest. So meron, no. So I hope kahit papaano na-inspire kayo. Okay? So for now, that's basically it for this special Go Live where I interviewed Jayne Bullen, Managing Director of Nutrition Network, and hoping to interview more and more international low carb advocates probably in the future, so that mas marami pa tayong matutunan at mas marami pa tayong inspiration na makuha sa kanila, no? But for now, goodbye muna, and see you on my next Go Live.